They say betrayal doesn't scream, it whispers through routines, tightens its grip in the subtle shift of a hand, the scent of unfamiliar cologne, the flicker of a glance too often repeated. Tonight, Savannah Langford didn't need evidence. Her intuition was already bracing for impact. The crystal champagne flute trembled slightly in Savannah Langford's perfectly manicured hand. To anyone watching, it might have seemed like a minor tremor, nothing worth noting at the formal gala hosted by Langford Group's quarterly investor summit. But Savannah knew her own body too well. Something was off. Her husband, Preston's, hand rested at the small of her back as they greeted Los Angeles financial elite, but the pressure felt different tonight. Distracted, performative. His eyes, usually locked on whoever he was charming, kept drifting to his phone, checking it with increasing frequency. "Darling," Preston murmured, his breath warm against her ear, his cologne, noticeably not his usual creed, lingering in her nostrils. "Councilman Reyes wants to discuss the new urban renewal partnership," he added as he pulled away. "Keep the Hawthorns entertained, will you? They're considering tripling their equity stake." Savannah's smile never faltered. "Of course," she replied, as Preston disappeared into the swirl of tuxedos and floor-length gowns. She glided toward the Hawthorns with practiced ease, her sapphire blue Ellie Saab gown, its hue selected to reflect the Langford Group's branding, whispering over the marble floors of the Getty Center's rotunda, reserved exclusively for the evening. "Caroline, Thomas, so lovely to see you both," Savannah said, her tone calibrated perfectly to blend warmth and poise. "I trust the latest fun performance exceeded expectations." As Thomas Hawthorne launched into market figures, Savannah executed her role with seamless charm, while her thoughts wrestled with another issue entirely. 3 feet away, Preston's executive assistant, Bianca, was typing furiously on her iPad, her eyes flicking toward Preston with a concern that didn't match the supposed smoothness of the event. Caroline Hawthorne touched Savannah's arm gently. "You've done an extraordinary job with the Langford Trust this year. The scholarship program for underserved youth. I cried watching the launch video." "That's incredibly kind of you, Caroline," Savannah responded sincerely. The foundation had been her sanctuary over the past 12 years of marriage, the one corner of the empire where Preston left her to lead without interference. Across the room, Preston threw his head back in laughter at something the councilman said, but his eyes were cold, distant. Savannah recognized that look. It was the same one he wore 6 years earlier when he orchestrated the collapse of a rival real estate empire, just before cutting ties with the entire senior staff. "If you'll excuse me," Savannah said to the Hawthorns, "I need to check on the silent auction." The Medan Foundation's Frontier campaign was tracking well above its projected goal. Breaking away, Savannah didn't head toward the auction tables as she'd claimed. Instead, she slipped into a quiet corridor, where the noise of clinking glasses and calculated laughter faded into hushed stillness. She needed to breathe. These events, the perpetual performance, the strategic networking, the excruciating detail management from her curated diamond earrings to her memorized knowledge of each guest's children, board seats and stock allocations, had once invigorated her. Now they felt like slowly tightening restraints. 12 years ago, when she first met Preston Langford at UCLA's Anderson School of Management, she could never have imagined this life. Back then, she'd been Savannah Huang, brilliant, bold, on a full scholarship with dreams of transforming community-driven finance. Preston had been the golden child, 4th-generation Langford heir to a diversified energy empire, pivoting toward sustainability under his father's forward-thinking leadership. Their courtship was a whirlwind. She still remembered their third date, when he'd taken her to the top floor of Langford Group's corporate tower after hours. "One day, all of this will be mine," he'd said, gesturing to the glittering LA skyline framed by floor-to-ceiling windows. "And I want you beside me when it happens." 6 months later, they were engaged. Russell Langford, Preston's father, had taken an immediate liking to her, appreciating her principled mind and ethical vision for the business world. "You'll keep this company honest," he'd told her at their engagement party, his voice already rasped by the illness that would claim his life 2 years later. The merging of their lives had once seemed flawless, her intellect and empathy complementing Preston's shrewd business instincts and storied legacy. The Los Angeles Business Review dubbed them the Langford line, an emblem of modern conscious capitalism. Savannah leaned against the smooth limestone wall, tucked away from view, and allowed her practiced composure to melt for just a breath. When had everything shifted? When had Preston's ambition turned brittle, dangerous? It wasn't just grief that changed him. Savannah knew that now. But what she hadn't admitted to anyone, not even herself, was that she had seen the signs years earlier. Late one night, 6 months after Russell's passing, she had discovered a set of internal reports tucked into a folder labeled for review. They outlined a quiet acquisition of a waste management firm with a known record of environmental violations. The purchase was buried in layers of subsidiaries. She'd confronted Preston in their home library, heart-pounding, voice low and pleading. "This isn't who we are," she had said. But Preston had simply kissed her forehead, told her she worried too much, and poured her another glass of wine, and she let it go. Told herself it was a one-off, that it would pass. She wanted to believe in him, needed to. That night became her deepest regret. Not because it marked the start of Preston's slide into unchecked power, but because, in that moment, Savannah had chosen silence. And silence, she now understood, had a price. Perhaps it started after his father's death. Russell Langford had been the moral compass of the firm, ensuring their green energy push remained authentic, not performative. Preston had mourned, yes, but also unmistakably seemed freed. Without oversight, small but telling changes crept into Langford Group's direction. Environmental protocols became negotiable expenses. Community outreach became mere photo ops, and their marriage began to shift too. "Mrs. Langford." Bianca appeared at the end of the hallway, tablet clutched tightly to her chest. "The auction is closing in 20 minutes. Mr. Langford thought you'd want to be present for the final bids." "Thank you, Bianca." Savannah stood tall, her mask of charm reinstated. "Is everything all right? You look unsettled." The younger woman's eyes flashed with something. Anxiety? A warning? Before professionalism overtook her expression. "Just the usual last-minute adjustments. Mr. Langford rescheduled several of tomorrow's meetings." Savannah's stomach chilled. "Which meetings?" she asked, her voice suddenly sharp. "Your breakfast with the Langford Trust Board has been postponed. Mr. Langford needs the conference room for an urgent call with the Singapore investors." Savannah stilled. Singapore. Again. For over 6 months, Preston had been taking calls labeled Singapore that never appeared in any official Langford Group documents. Twice, Savannah had caught fragments of these conversations, enough to know they had nothing to do with urban development or any of the group's announced international ventures. "I see. Thank you for letting me know." She turned to rejoin the gala but paused. "Bianca, has Mr. Langford changed his cologne recently?" The assistant's cheeks colored. I wouldn't know, Mrs. Langford." But she did know. The tremor in Bianca's voice confirmed what Savannah had started to suspect 3 months earlier. That was when Preston's late nights became habitual, when his phone started landing face down on the table the moment she entered a room, when the faint trace of unfamiliar perfume clung to his custom suits. At first, she dismissed it all, chalked it up to stress, to paranoia. Preston wouldn't jeopardize their marriage, or more importantly to him, the meticulously crafted image they had built together. Langford Group's market perception partly hinged on their seamless partnership, the warm, visionary wife tempering the cool precision of the relentless CEO. Even the board had remarked on the strength of their unified leadership brand, calling it a key driver of investor trust. But now the clues had stacked up like evidence in a sealed indictment. The secretive calls, the encrypted passwords on every device, the boutique hotel transactions routed through shadowy shell subsidiaries. One Savannah only discovered because she still had access from restructuring finance workflows after Russell Langford's death. 2 weeks ago, she'd found a receipt for a Graf diamond bracelet, charged to the corporate gifting card, a bracelet she had never received. That night, she began preparing in silence. Back at the gala, Savannah navigated the room with a renewed sense of clarity. Every interaction was strategic now. Her attention narrowed to select individuals. Judge Callahan, whose wife chaired several educational nonprofits with Savannah. Elias Morton, Langford Group's longtime legal counsel and one of Russell's closest confidants. And Monica Choi, head of a massive institutional investor fund who had repeatedly raised red flags about Langford Group's subtle ethical decline. "Savannah, darling," Monica exclaimed, clasping both of her hands. "That transition initiative you launched for displaced refinery workers, transformational." I cried watching the pilot footage. "You're too kind, Monica. For now, I'm happy focusing on the trust's work," Savannah replied, smiling even as she noticed Preston's gaze on them from across the room. His face was unreadable. "Although," she added lightly, "I've been reading through the quarterly briefs. I did have a few questions about the new Singapore engagement." Monica's brow lifted. "Singapore? That hasn't been presented to the board." "My mistake," Savannah said smoothly. "I must have misheard something Preston mentioned in passing." The evening continued, a perfect orchestration of wealth and influence. But now, Savannah's eyes caught everything. The subtle glances, the hushed whispers, the way certain directors hovered around Preston with muted concern. Preston Langford's chief financial officer, Julian Marks, kept checking his watch, his usual stoic expression betrayed by flickers of tension. At exactly 10:30 p.m., Preston tapped his champagne glass with a practiced elegance. The room gradually quieted as he stepped onto the small platform where the string quartet had just finished playing. "Thank you all for joining us this evening," his voice rang out with crisp authority. Langford Group has always prided itself on transparency with both our partners and investors. As many of you know, our Q3 results outperformed forecasts by 18%, and our renewable sector now accounts for 62% of our total energy output. A wave of applause rolled through the crowd. Preston's smile gleamed under the soft gallery lighting. "Before we conclude tonight's celebration, I'd like to share something special," he continued, scanning the audience until his gaze locked onto Savannah. "Our annual Langford family dinner is next week, a tradition my father began as a reminder that no matter how far we expand, we are, at our core, a family enterprise." There was something in his look, smug, sharp, that made Savannah's stomach tighten. The triumph in his eyes wasn't corporate. It was personal. "This year's dinner will include a surprise I believe marks an exciting new chapter for Langford Group and the Langford family." Preston raised his glass. "To the future of Langford Group, may we always surpass expectations." The crowd echoed his toast. Savannah's expression remained flawless, her smile poised as ever. But inside, her thoughts raced. Preston had never mentioned any surprise. Even more unsettling was the silent exchange between him and Julian Marks, a look heavy with something between dread and excitement. When Preston returned to her side, his hand once again slid to the small of her back. He bent toward her ear, his voice low, his tone laced with mock cheer. "I do hope you're not too attached to your seat at the head of the table, darling. It's time for some new blood in the Langford family, don't you think?" Savannah felt the floor shift beneath her heels. For the first time in over a decade, Preston had completely misread her. He assumed her deepest fear was losing her place, her image, her influence. But what he had never understood was that her purpose wasn't power for power's sake. It was to ensure that Langford Group lived up to its mission of real, meaningful impact. "New blood sounds invigorating," she replied coolly, locking eyes with him. "I look forward to seeing exactly what you have in store." Preston's smile flickered, just briefly. Perhaps he sensed something unexpected in her composure. But before he could say more, guests closed in, offering their congratulations on another successful gala. As the last investor exited, Savannah stood beside her husband, playing the part of the perfect partner, just as they always had. But inside, a quiet resolve crystallized. Whatever Preston planned for the Langford family dinner, she would be ready. Not just to defend herself, but to protect the legacy Russell Langford had entrusted to both of them. The game was shifting, and Savannah Langford would not be a pawn. Preston had always underestimated her, believing she was the flawless corporate wife he had shaped. He never took the time to remember the fierce strategist he had fallen in love with at UCLA. That had been his first mistake. Now he was about to make another one. The Langford family dining room, with its 20-foot ceilings and sweeping views of the Santa Monica coastline, had witnessed decades of veiled power moves and corporate strategy masked as family dinners. Tonight's annual gathering was no different. The though Savannah suspected this evening would surpass all previous Langford theatrics. For the past week, she had prepared with meticulous precision for whatever surprise Preston had up his sleeve. Her efforts included discreet meetings with Elias Morton, Langford Group's longtime legal counsel, and quietly pulling archival financial records, documents that technically shouldn't exist. Records tracing funds through shell entities in Singapore, Panama, and the Cayman Islands. As she placed the final setting, Limoges china atop hand-embroidered Belgian lace, accented with pure white orchids, Savannah couldn't help but acknowledge the irony. Preston had always insisted these dinners take place at their estate, never at a restaurant, citing the importance of maintaining a family business ambiance, something Russell Langford had long championed. In truth, it was because Preston preferred playing his games on home turf, where he held every advantage. Mrs. Langford, the first guests have arrived, their longtime housekeeper, Dolores, called softly from the hallway. "Thank you, Dolores. I'll be right there." Savannah smoothed the navy Chanel dress that hugged her frame, elegant, understated, perfectly tailored, and touched the string of pearls that had once belonged to Russell's mother. A quiet reminder of legacy, of roots. In the foyer, Julian Marks and his wife Claire were handing over their coats to the staff. As CFO, Julian was Preston's right hand in every facet of Langford Group, both legitimate and questionable. "Savannah, you look radiant as ever," Claire said warmly, kissing both cheeks. "The house is gorgeous," Julian added, though his eyes swept the space anxiously, clearly searching for Preston. "He's running a bit behind," Savannah replied with practiced ease, reading his concern. "Something about finalizing details for his big announcement." Julian's jaw tightened briefly before he composed himself with a smile. "Yes, big night for Langford Group." "Indeed," Savannah said pleasantly, her gaze cool. "A defining moment, I'd say." The way Julian's shoulders stiffened confirmed what she'd already guessed. He knew exactly what Preston was planning, and he wasn't comfortable with it. Good. She could use that. Over the next 30 minutes, the rest of the guests arrived. Victoria Langford, Preston's widowed mother, whose frostiness toward Savannah had thawed only after years of proven loyalty to the family empire. Lucas and Aaron Langford, Preston's brother and sister-in-law, who oversaw European operations. Emily Choi, daughter of Monica Choi and newly appointed to the board. Judge Howard Callahan and his wife Beatrice, and several other senior executives and family members. Still, there was no sign of the man of the hour. "Where's Preston?" Lucas asked, accepting a tumbler of scotch from the bartender Savannah had hired specifically for tonight. "I'm sure Preston is simply making an entrance," Victoria Langford said dryly. At 72, she remained a commanding presence, her silver hair swept into a flawless chignon, her posture rigid with elegance. "You know Preston," Savannah replied with a soft laugh. "He does love a bit of theatrics." The guests transitioned to the living room for pre-dinner cocktails. The conversation meandered through carefully curated topics: the new exhibit at the Broad, updates on elite private academies where their children were enrolled, the strangely warm October breeze drifting in from the coast. Savannah moved through the room with ease, engaging gracefully while keeping one eye on the entrance. Unlike Julian, whose nerves betrayed him, she wasn't waiting for Preston with anxiety. She was assessing the shape of his performance, predicting the reveal he'd so carefully set up. The answer arrived at precisely 7:45 p.m., 15 minutes past the planned dinner start. The elevator doors opened. Preston Langford stepped out, dressed in a perfectly tailored Tom Ford suit. Impeccable, as always. But he wasn't alone. A hush swept over the room like a silent ripple. Behind him emerged a young woman, early 20s, by Savannah's estimate, with sleek chestnut hair and a delicate porcelain face. Her black dress was understated but expensive, clearly styled to soften the attention that would inevitably fall on her very noticeable pregnancy. Savannah's eyes moved clinically to her abdomen, at least 6 months along. Preston's smile flashed, a blend of satisfaction and malice, as he placed his hand at the small of the woman's back. The same possessive gesture he had long used with Savannah at corporate galas. "Everyone," he said, his voice loud and clear, laced with the faux warmth he reserved for investor calls and media interviews. "I'd like you to meet Madeline Pierce. Madeline will be heading our new special projects division, and she'll also be joining our family in more ways than one. His hand drifted briefly to rest on the curve of her belly. As you can see. The silence was complete. Even Victoria, who prided herself on never being rattled, stared at her son, stunned. Savannah felt the entire room turn toward her, waiting for the reaction. The collapse, the spectacle. The displaced wife, rendered irrelevant by a younger woman carrying the heir Savannah and Preston had never had. He had staged the scene for maximum impact, not just to wound her pride, but to fracture her position in the Langford hierarchy. For a heartbeat, Savannah allowed herself to feel the devastation, not just of her marriage, but of everything she had spent 12 years building. Fury flared like a solar flare, then cooled instantly into something sharper. Clarity. Preston had choreographed this moment expecting a tearful collapse. Shock. A breakdown he could leverage to explain what would come next. Her removal from the trust. A divorce designed to shrink her share of the estate. Rumors of instability whispered among board members. He had chosen the annual dinner on purpose. Surrounded her with people loyal not to her, but to the Langford legacy. What Preston had forgotten was who he married. Savannah stepped forward, her smile warm and unshaken as she approached Madeline directly. How wonderful to finally meet you, Madeline. Preston has been so secretive lately. Now I understand why. Madeline's eyes widened slightly, clearly unprepared for this gracious welcome. Up close, Savannah could see the young woman's nerves, the subtle quiver in her hand as she accepted the extended handshake. Mrs. Langford, Madeline began, her voice gentle with a faint southern lilt. Please, Savannah, she said, interrupting gently. After all, we're going to be family, aren't we? Turning back toward the room, Savannah addressed the stunned gathering with practiced elegance. Shall we move to dinner? Our chef has something special planned, and I'd hate for it to go cold. Preston's expression flickered, part confusion, part irritation, as Savannah gently guided Madeline toward the dining room, her hand lightly on the young woman's arm. This clearly was not how he had envisioned the scene. You're not upset? Madeline whispered, barely audible. We'll have time to talk, Savannah replied softly, her voice calm. But right now, you look like you could use a good chair, and perhaps some water instead of wine. As they entered the dining room, Savannah made a swift decision. Madeline, why don't you sit here, next to me? This chair has the best support for your lower back, she said, gesturing to her own seat. It was the anchor seat, opposite Preston, the position of strength at the Langford table. Placing Madeline beside her instead of near Preston sent a silent but resounding message. Savannah was still in command of the room. Preston's jaw tightened slightly as he took in the new seating, but he said nothing. Objecting now would only make him look small. The guests entered slowly, taking their places in near silence. The tension was so thick it seemed to warp the air. Well, this is certainly a surprise, Victoria Langford said at last, her voice colder than steel. Preston, perhaps you'd like to explain how long this arrangement has been in place. Preston rallied his composure and smiled. Madeline and I have been collaborating on some new initiatives for nearly a year. From that work, a personal connection developed naturally. He raised his glass, tone smooth. Sometimes the most meaningful partnerships come from the most unexpected places. How interesting, Savannah said lightly. I wasn't aware we had a special projects division. Which department does it report through? Julian Marks, mid-sip of wine, nearly choked. It's, a direct report to the CEO's office. Still in development. Fascinating, Emily Choi interjected, her eyes sharp. As a member of the board, I'm curious why this division hasn't been outlined in any of our org briefings. Preston's smile tightened. It's been handled discreetly due to the sensitive nature of the work. I'll be presenting a full overview at the next board meeting. We look forward to it, Emily said smoothly, her gaze flicking briefly to Savannah, who returned it without missing a beat. As dinner moved steadily through its courses, the initial shock settled into a delicate ballet of pointed questions and graceful evasions. Preston, recovering from Savannah's composed response, began detailing Madeline's credentials. A Wharton MBA, experience at a boutique consulting firm, specialized knowledge in emerging markets. Madeline herself remained mostly quiet, responding when directly addressed with a soft-spoken intelligence that suggested she was, indeed, qualified for an executive role. Still, Savannah noticed the way her eyes frequently flicked between her and Preston, like she was trying to read the silent power struggle spanning the length of the hand-woven cushion rug. "And how are you finding Los Angeles, Madeline?" Savannah asked during a lull in the conversation. Preston mentioned a southern accent. "Georgia, perhaps?" "South Carolina," Madeline corrected gently, surprise flickering across her face. "Charleston. And LA is overwhelming sometimes, but exciting." "I remember feeling the same way when I arrived for business school," Savannah replied with a warm smile. "If you ever need a local guide to the quieter side of the city, I'd be happy to show you around. There are some lovely prenatal yoga studios in Silver Lake that a few of my friends swore by." This open acknowledgement of the pregnancy, offered with warmth rather than confrontation, rippled across the table. Preston's expression darkened, his grip tightening slightly around his water glass. "That's very kind," Madeline murmured, visibly uneasy. "When is the baby due?" Victoria asked without preamble. "January," Madeline replied, instinctively placing a hand on her stomach. "A New Year's baby," Savannah noted. "How fitting for fresh starts." The conversation turned to safer ground for a while. During the main course, the room buzzed with small talk, but the tension never left. Lucas Langford cast concerned glances toward Savannah, while Aaron gently engaged Madeline with questions about pregnancy symptoms and nursery themes. Judge Callahan and Julian Marks flanked Preston in a tight huddle, their conversation low and guarded, broken only by the occasional watchful glance across the table. By the time dessert arrived, Savannah could see the frustration mounting behind Preston's eyes. His dramatic reveal had failed. Instead of wilting beneath public humiliation, Savannah had reasserted herself with grace, stealing the narrative from him and earning quiet admiration from others in the room. Madeline, meanwhile, looked increasingly ill at ease. Before the plates were cleared, Preston rose as coffee was poured, straightening with the practiced authority he wore in every boardroom. "Before we conclude this lovely evening," he began, "I wanted to share one more announcement." He glanced around the room. "With the upcoming changes to our family, Savannah and I have been discussing what her role will look like moving forward. We've agreed that it would be best for her to scale back on her responsibilities at Langford Group to focus more on her personal interests." There it was, the second act of his plan, using Madeline and the child as justification to push Savannah out of the company she had helped steward for over a decade. "How thoughtful of you, Preston," Savannah replied, gently placing her coffee cup back onto its saucer with a soft clink. "Although, I don't seem to recall that conversation." A flicker of something dangerous passed through Preston's eyes. "Well, perhaps not in those exact words, darling, but we've often discussed how stretched thin you've been, juggling the trust, the board." "Commitments, actually," Savannah said, rising gracefully and lifting her water glass. "I've been reflecting quite a bit on my role at Langford Group lately." The room stilled, all eyes turning to her. This, Preston thought, was the moment, the collapse, the concession, the admission of defeat. But instead, Savannah smiled, calm, composed. Her gaze moved slowly across the table, meeting each guest's eyes. "I'd like to propose a toast to Langford Group and to the legacy Russell Langford created. A legacy rooted in innovation, in integrity, and in impact." A few murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Glasses were raised. Preston's remained still. "Russell once told me," Savannah continued, "that a company is only as stable as its moral foundation, that profit without purpose is hollow, and growth without accountability is dangerous." Her eyes found Preston's, sharp and unblinking. "I've always taken those words seriously, perhaps more seriously than some might have realized." She raised her glass higher, to new beginnings, and to the truth which always finds its way to the surface, no matter how deeply it's buried. The room held its collective breath. The meaning in her words lingered, unclear to most, but unmistakable to a few. Preston's knuckles whitened around the stem of his wineglass. His smile was frozen, strained, trying to read between lines he had not expected. Across the table, Madeline Pierce hesitated, then slowly lifted her water glass. "To the truth," she echoed quietly, her gaze meeting Savannah's with something that hovered between comprehension and caution. Glasses clinked around the table. Savannah returned to her seat with poised serenity, though her thoughts surged forward. Preston had moved sooner than she'd expected, and now she had to accelerate her own timeline. Now, she said brightly, the earlier tension seemingly vanished. Who would like coffee? And Madeline, I've got the perfect herbal tea for you, soothing and caffeine-free. The battle lines had been drawn. Preston had made his move, expecting a swift collapse. What he hadn't prepared for was resistance, and certainly not from the wife he had underestimated for far too long. This wasn't the end, it was the opening move. The next morning, Savannah woke before dawn. Preston remained in the guest suite, a sleeping arrangement that had quietly become the norm over the past year. She moved silently into her home office and locked the door behind her. From a hidden drawer in her desk, she retrieved a slim, leather-bound notebook. Inside were pages of neatly written notes, times, dates, locations. A personal log of Preston's increasingly suspicious behavior over the last 8 months. What had begun as gut instinct over his infidelity had unraveled into something far darker, something she couldn't ignore. The email she'd glimpsed, buried in his drafts folder, mentioned alternate revenue channels and unregulated loopholes in Southeast Asia. This wasn't about a mistress. This was about potential fraud. Savannah hadn't spent a decade becoming the trusted public face of Langford Group by being naive. The Langford name held weight because of its supposed ethical leadership in the clean energy space. If Preston had compromised that, the entire enterprise Russell built was at risk. At exactly 7:15 a.m., Savannah sent a text to a contact listed in her phone under Pilates instructor. Coffee at the usual place, 8:30. 45 minutes later, dressed in workout gear and a loose ponytail, she stepped into a quiet cafe tucked into a side street in Los Feliz, far from the high-rise towers of downtown, where she was more recognizable. In the back corner, a man in his late 60s sat casually with a chessboard already set up. "Good morning, Elias," she said softly, sliding into the seat across from him. Elias Morton, Langford Group's longtime legal counsel and Russell Langford's closest confidant, moved a pawn across the board before replying. "Your move, my dear, on the board and in life, it seems." "Preston's accelerating his plan," Savannah said flatly. "He brought Madeline to the family dinner last night." Elias's eyebrows lifted. Bold, even for Preston. "She's pregnant, due in January." The older man leaned back, processing the news. That explains his sudden interest in succession protocol reviews. Savannah's grip tightened slightly around her ceramic cup. "He's trying to force me out completely. Made the announcement at dinner. Said I'd be stepping away from Langford Group." Elias let out a quiet, disapproving sigh. Russell would be livid. "He always said you were the best thing that ever happened to that company, and to his son." "Russell isn't here anymore," Savannah said softly, "and Preston's been dismantling his father's legacy piece by piece. The Singapore operation is just the latest." Elias glanced over his shoulder, then leaned in. "I reviewed the documents you sent me. If what you found holds up, Preston's been routing Langford funds through no less than 3 offshore shell entities. The environmental compliance paperwork tied to the Indonesian contracts also appears, at best, heavily redacted." "They're falsified," Savannah confirmed. "I spoke with Dr. Eliza Watkins last week, the scientist who ran the original environmental impact studies. She says the reports submitted to the Indonesian government bear her signature, but the data's been tampered with. Real contamination levels are significantly higher." Elias's face grew grim. "That's not just unethical, it's criminal." "I know." She moved her bishop. "Check." He nodded slowly, eyes back on the board. "So what's your next move?" "I need to see Russell's will. The original, not the summary Preston handed out to the family." Elias studied her. "May I ask why?" "Because Russell was many things, but careless wasn't one of them. He would never leave the company defenseless in the hands of someone who'd tear it apart." Elias exhaled. "It's in the company's secured vault. Preston's the only one with official access." "Not quite," Savannah said, the edges of her smile tightening. "Victoria has access too, and she owes me a favor, after I kept quiet about her little mishap with prescription renewals last year." For a second, Elias looked genuinely impressed. "You've been planning this." "I've been collecting information for a while now. There's a difference." Savannah paused, then added softly, "I loved him, Elias. I wanted to be wrong." The old lawyer's gaze softened. "I know, my dear. Russell knew it too. That's why he trusted you so deeply." He moved his king out of check. Your move. 3 hours later, Savannah sat in Victoria Langford's penthouse overlooking the Pacific, an opulent space filled with museum-worthy antiques and the cloying scent of tuberose, her mother-in-law's longtime favorite. I must admit, Victoria said, pouring tea from a delicate Limoges set, your composure last night was admirable. Most women would have made a scene. I'm not most women, Savannah replied evenly. That's why Russell valued my presence in Preston's life. Victoria's immaculately preserved features flickered with surprise at Savannah's bluntness. My husband cared for you a great deal, she said at last, and he worried about the future of the company. Savannah set her teacup down. Victoria, I need to see Russell's original will, not the version Preston showed the board. The older woman went still. What makes you think there's a difference? Because I knew your husband, and because Preston has been rerouting Langford Group assets into ventures Russell would never have supported. Victoria studied her long and hard. You're referring to Singapore. Now it was Savannah's turn to be surprised. You know, I may be reduced to the ceremonial role of matriarch, but I was Russell's partner for 4 decades. I know when numbers don't add up. She set her cup down with a decisive click. What exactly are you planning? To protect Langford Group's legacy, and maybe save Preston from himself. Victoria held her gaze a moment longer, then rose and walked to the far wall, toward a Monet painting Savannah had always admired. With a soft click, she swung the canvas forward, revealing a discreet wall safe. After entering a combination, she retrieved a sealed envelope. Russell left this with me, she said. He told me that if Preston ever began placing profit above principal, I should make sure this ended up in the right hands. She held the envelope out. I believe those hands are yours. Inside was a notarized codicil to Russell's will, dated 1 week before his death. Savannah's breath caught as she read it. He created a new class of voting shares. Split authority, Victoria finished, between Preston and the Langford Foundation. Which I direct exclusively, Savannah whispered, still stunned. Russell never fully trusted Preston's moral compass, so he built in a safeguard. Savannah looked up, her mind already working through the implications. Preston doesn't know this exists. No, Victoria confirmed, and he's been running Langford Group like he has absolute control. Her smile sharpened. Any major decisions made without joint authorization could be invalidated, including, I suspect, this little special projects division he created for his pregnant mistress. The Langford Foundation's offices occupied the 42nd floor of Langford Tower, strategically placed just beneath the executive suite where Preston operated. That afternoon, Savannah entered via the private elevator, only to be met immediately by her assistant, Meredith, rushing toward her. Mrs. Langford, you have a visitor waiting in your office. She wouldn't give her name, but she insisted it was urgent. Savannah's steps hesitated. When she opened the door to her office, she found Madeline Pierce perched tensely on the edge of a guest chair, both hands gently cupping her pregnant belly. Madeline, this is unexpected. The younger woman stood, clearly uncomfortable. I hope I'm not intruding. I needed to speak with you, alone. Savannah quietly shut the door and motioned toward the chair. Then let's talk. There's clearly a great deal we need to address. Madeline sat again, folding her hands over her lap. First, I want to say I'm sorry about last night, she began in a rush. I never wanted that. Preston told me you knew about us, that it was all arranged. Did he now? Savannah's tone remained even as she took her seat behind her desk. And what else has Preston shared with you? Madeline shifted, visibly uneasy. He said you were stepping away from Langford Group, that you and he had drifted apart years ago, but kept up appearances for business reasons. I see. And your appointment as head of special projects? Was that also part of this so-called arrangement? A flush rose in Madeline's neck. He said you approved it, that you understood my qualifications would be good for the company. Interesting, Savannah replied, leaning slightly forward. Considering I've never even seen your resume. She fixed her gaze. Madeline, I don't think you came here to repeat Preston's narrative. What do you actually want? The young woman's composure finally cracked. Protection. For my baby and me. Protection? From Preston? Madeline nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. He's not who I thought he was. The things he's had me do, the papers he's had me sign. Savannah's interest sharpened. What kind of papers? Madeline reached into her handbag and pulled out a flash drive. Financial authorizations for companies I've never heard of. Backdated contracts. Environmental certifications that I supposedly verified, even though I have no background in science. Her hands trembled. When I asked questions, he told me it was normal, standard industry stuff. But you're smart enough to recognize fraud when you see it, Savannah finished. Why bring this to me? Why not the authorities? Madeline's eyes filled with tears. Because my signature's on everything. If I go to the authorities without help, I could go to jail, and my baby. She placed the flash drive gently on the desk. Preston said you were soft, that you cared more about doing good than doing business. I'm hoping that means you'll help me. Savannah studied her. The fear and desperation felt real, but trust was dangerous. What exactly are you offering? I'll testify. Everything I know about Preston, the offshore deals, the fake compliance paperwork. In return, I want protection and immunity for me and my child. Madeline straightened, bracing herself for judgment. I made a terrible mistake getting involved with him, Madeline said, her voice barely above a whisper. But I won't let my baby suffer for it. She looked directly at Savannah. And if you refuse, then I'll take my chances with the FBI. At least then I can say I tried to make things right. Savannah picked up the flash drive, turning it slowly in her fingers as she considered her options. Her fingers trembled slightly, the weight of years of betrayal and calculated distance now condensed into a single sliver of plastic. What Madeline was offering wasn't just information. It was a fracture in the illusion Preston had built, and an opportunity to finally shatter it. But Savannah had learned not to trust anything too quickly. Not when the stakes were everything. Madeline could be sincere, or this could be a trap orchestrated by Preston to catch her investigating him. Carefully, she replied, I'll need time to verify what's on this drive, and I'll need your full cooperation. Madeline nodded quickly. Anything, whatever you need. Start, Savannah said, by telling me everything you know about Singapore. By late afternoon, Preston began to sense something was off. His calls to Madeline were going straight to voicemail. The initial paperwork he had submitted to remove Savannah from the Langford Foundation board remained unsigned. And most troubling of all, Emily Choi had just requested an urgent meeting to discuss governance concerns before next week's board session. When his private elevator opened into his penthouse office suite, he was startled to find Lucas already inside, waiting for him. Little early for a family drop-in, isn't it? Preston said, tossing his jacket onto a chair. Lucas didn't return the smile. What the hell are you doing, Preston? You'll need to be more specific. Madeline Pierce, the pregnancy, ambushing your wife at the family dinner, Lucas counted off on his fingers. And now I'm hearing you're trying to force Savannah out of the foundation. Have you lost your mind? Preston poured himself a scotch. My personal life is my business. As for the foundation, Savannah's efforts are better applied elsewhere now that we're restructuring. Restructuring without board approval? Lucas folded his arms. Dad would be ashamed. Dad is gone, Preston snapped, and I'm running this company now. We can't keep bleeding money on pet projects that don't drive profit. The foundation isn't a pet project. It's central to our public mission, and Savannah's work has opened doors we couldn't access otherwise. Preston waved a dismissive hand. Doors with low returns and high regulatory red tape? The real opportunity is in Singapore and Indonesia. Now Lucas frowned. Those operations aren't even in the quarterly updates. They're still in development. You'll be briefed when it's necessary. Like Savannah will be briefed on her own termination? Lucas shook his head. You're making a huge mistake. She's not just your wife. She's respected in the industry. The board trusts her. Investors trust her. They trust the Langford name, Preston corrected, his tone cold. And that legacy will continue through my child. With Madeline, not through a woman who couldn't even perform her most basic role, providing an heir. The slam of the office door was the only warning before a voice cut across the room like a blade. Is that what this is about? Savannah stood in the doorway, composed, but her eyes flared with fury. My failure to give you a Langford heir? Both men turned as she stepped into the room. Preston tried to recover his stance, but it was already too late. We were just discussing foundation matters. No, Savannah said coolly. You were discussing my removal and my apparent reproductive inadequacies. She stepped fully into the room and nodded toward Lucas. Would you give us a moment? My husband and I need to speak, privately. Lucas hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. Are you sure? Quite, Savannah replied. This won't take long. After Lucas exited reluctantly, Preston leaned back against his desk with manufactured ease. Come to accept the inevitable, darling? On the contrary, Savannah said, walking forward. I've come to give you one chance to salvage what's left of your father's legacy, and possibly your freedom. Preston's smile faltered. What are you talking about? Singapore, Indonesia, the doctored environmental reports, the offshore accounts. She placed a thick folder on his desk. Shall I continue? For a moment, genuine shock flickered across Preston's face before it hardened into denial. You've been spying on me. No, Savannah said evenly. I've been protecting Langford Group from its most dangerous threat, you. Her voice remained even, but her pulse pounded beneath the surface. This wasn't just a confrontation, it was a reckoning. The culmination of sleepless nights, buried heartbreak, and the slow unraveling of trust that had once defined their marriage. She opened the folder. Inside were printed records, 3 shell companies in Singapore, payments masked as consulting fees to Indonesian officials, falsified environmental data concealing toxic contamination that would have triggered mandatory shutdowns. Preston's eyes darted to the pages, then back to her. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? Savannah said. Madeline gave me quite the detailed account earlier today. That clearly rattled him. She came to you? With a conscience, it seems. Something you've long since abandoned. She saw the flicker in his eyes, a mix of fear and disbelief, and for a fleeting second she grieved. Not for the man in front of her, but for the man she once thought he could be. Savannah closed the folder. Your father feared this might happen, that you might one day place ambition over ethics. That's why he added a codicil to his will. Preston went pale. You're lying. The codicil's been in your mother's possession for years, she said. It grants dual control of Langford Group, split between you and the Foundation. She smiled faintly. Which I control, including decisions about personnel, including hastily invented divisions for pregnant mistresses. Preston lunged, grabbing her arm. Where is it? What did you do? Savannah stared at his hand until he let go. It's safe. So is Madeline. So is every piece of evidence. You wouldn't dare expose this, he hissed. It would destroy Langford Group. Your precious foundation would collapse. Not if the board moves quickly to excise the rot and restore accountability, she replied, straightening her jacket. You have until tomorrow morning to resign as CEO and transfer operational control to the Interim Leadership Committee. I've already spoken with the key board members. Her tone was steel beneath silk, the strength of a woman who had been dismissed, underestimated, and finally pushed too far. Preston's laugh was hollow. You really think the board would choose you over me? I'm a Langford by blood. You're just the barren wife I'm replacing. No, Preston, she said, voice calm and final. I'm the woman your father trusted to protect the company's soul. She walked toward the door, then paused. Oh, and you should know. Madeline has agreed to testify, Savannah said calmly, in exchange for immunity. She reached for the office door. The only real question now is whether you'll face civil penalties or criminal charges. Preston's voice called out behind her, the edge of desperation creeping in. What do you want, Savannah? Money? A permanent seat at the Foundation? Name it. Name your price. She paused, then turned. Her expression was almost gentle, almost pitying. That's always been your problem, Preston. You assume everything and everyone has a price. She opened the door. Some things don't. Like integrity, like legacy, like justice. And then she was gone, closing the door behind her with a quiet finality. In her hand was the flash drive that held everything she needed. Wire transfers, doctored reports, and Madeline's sworn statement outlining Preston's direct instructions for facilitating fraud across multiple international jurisdictions. The Langford empire was about to face its most profound reckoning since Russell's death. And this time, it would be steered by the values its founder intended, whether or not his son remained part of it. The next morning, Savannah's private line rang at 5:17 a.m. Elias Morton's voice was tight. They're moving against you. Preston's called an emergency executive committee meeting for 7. Savannah sat upright in bed, fully alert. On what grounds? Mental health, Elias said grimly. He's claiming you're unstable, paranoid, suffering emotional distress over his new relationship, making wild accusations. Savannah let out a short breath of bitter amusement. Let me guess, he has a psychiatric report to back it up? From Dr. Philip Morrow, Elias confirmed. Backdated to suggest you've been under discreet evaluation for months. Philip Morrow, she repeated. The same doctor who magically cleared Russell to sign over company rights while sedated on end-of-life medication. Preston's recycling tactics, Elias said. Same playbook, different target. Who's attending this meeting? Inner circle only, Julian Marks, Lucas, Victoria, and 3 board members loyal to Preston. Savannah moved to her closet, phone tucked between her shoulder and cheek. What about Emily Choi? Judge Callahan? Not invited. He's cherry-picking the audience. As expected, she pulled out a charcoal Armani suit, battle armor for what lay ahead. Are you still at the office? She asked. Yes, I've been digging into the documents all night. Savannah, it's worse than we thought. How bad? The Singapore deal. It's not just tax fraud. They're laundering money for a Southeast Asian mining consortium with ties to organized crime. Savannah's hand froze on a silk blouse. Are you sure? The paper trail is clear. If this goes public, we're talking felony charges, international law enforcement. It could implode the entire company. Savannah closed her eyes for a moment, steadying herself. Then we need to move faster than planned. Meet me at Madeline's hotel? Yes, she said. The Carlisle. 30 minutes. I'll be there. As she dressed, Savannah's mind moved quickly through every contingency. Preston wouldn't stop with trying to discredit her. That was just the start. Once he removed her from power, he'd isolate her, cut her off from documents, from allies, and then would come the endgame. Institutionalization, perhaps, or fabricated charges, or worse. On Savannah's side, Russell Langford's codicil remained her strongest line of defense. But it wasn't bulletproof. For it to be enforceable, the board had to acknowledge it. If Preston managed to convince enough directors that she was mentally unstable, the codicil could be contested or even ignored until a prolonged legal battle resolved its legitimacy. Time wasn't her ally. Madeline Pierce opened the door to her hotel suite wearing silk pajamas, her hair tousled from sleep, but her expression wide-eyed and alert with fear. He knows, doesn't he? She asked the moment Savannah and Elias entered. Preston called me 6 times last night. He left voicemails. He knows we met. He suspects, Savannah said, setting her briefcase on the small dining table. But he doesn't know what evidence you've handed over. We need to move you, somewhere safer. Madeline instinctively placed a hand over her stomach. He said he'd make sure I never saw my baby if I betrayed him. That's not going to happen, Savannah said firmly. Elias? The lawyer pulled out his phone. I have a property in Connecticut, completely off the books. It's held by a shell entity I created years ago for a client during a high-profile divorce. Preston would never be able to trace it to me. Will that be enough? Madeline asked, her voice quivering. You don't know how far he'll go. Savannah looked at her, really looked, and saw the depth of fear etched in her face. The bruising beneath her eyes, the defensive curl of her posture, it all spoke volumes. This wasn't just anxiety. It was a woman clinging to survival, fraying at the seams but still holding it together for the life she carried. You're right, she said quietly. I probably don't. So why don't you tell me? Madeline sank down on the edge of the bed, her hands folded over her lap. I thought he was just ruthless, that he cut corners to drive profit. It didn't seem that terrible at first. People do it all the time, right? She gave a bitter laugh. Then I saw what happened to people who questioned him. David Mercer, his former VP of operations, raised red flags about the Indonesia project. Preston didn't just fire him. He fabricated financial misconduct charges. Now David can't get hired anywhere in the industry. Her voice wavered, and Savannah saw the weight of guilt pressing down on her, a guilt too heavy for someone who had been manipulated so completely. Elias's face tightened. Russell would never have tolerated that. Preston used to say his father was weak, Madeline continued. That Langford group could have been 10 times bigger if Russell hadn't been so obsessed with doing the right thing. Her eyes lifted to Savannah's. He talked about you too. I'm sure he did, Savannah murmured. He said you were useful as the company's public face, the moral compass, the soft side that made investors feel safe. But behind closed doors, you were a barrier, a roadblock. Savannah's smile was thin. Translation: I wouldn't play along when he started stripping away every safeguard Russell put in place. There's more, Madeline whispered, her voice dropping. He has a plan to erase you completely, Madeline said, her voice tight. Not just from the company, but from his life. Divorce? Savannah asked. Madeline hesitated, visibly disturbed. I don't think it's just divorce he's planning. A heavy silence filled the room as the implications sank in. Elias cleared his throat. All the more reason to act now. Madeline, pack only what's essential. My driver will take you to Connecticut. While we deal with Preston, Savannah added. As Madeline began gathering her belongings, Savannah sat at the small hotel desk, flipping through their compiled documents. Her eyes stopped at a specific line in a spreadsheet. $12 million in transfers from Langford Group subsidiaries to a firm named Azure Horizon Limited. Elias? What do we know about Azure Horizon? He glanced up from his phone. Very little. It's registered in the Cayman Islands, incorporated about 8 months ago. Why? Savannah tapped the page. These transfers are labeled as security consulting, but the amounts are oddly structured, small enough to avoid automated scrutiny, but frequent enough to raise suspicion. And the timing matches perfectly with Preston's aggressive push into Indonesia. Madeline paused mid-fold, a sweater clutched in her hands. Azure Horizon, she murmured. I've heard that name. Preston had me authorize payments to them last week. Did he explain what they did? He said they were specialists, Madeline replied, her face paling, that they made sure our Indonesian operations went smoothly. Her eyes widened in sudden realization. Oh God, they're fixers, aren't they? People who make problems disappear. Elias moved to examine the files more closely. These payment patterns are consistent with how corporations discreetly fund private security firms that operate in the less transparent end of the spectrum, the kind that deals with regulatory or personnel issues permanently. A chill spread through Savannah. Preston wasn't just committing fraud, he was potentially working with people who eliminated threats. We need copies of everything, she said, keeping her voice level despite the weight in her chest. And we need Madeline gone. Now. 3 hours later, with Madeline en route to Connecticut under armed private security arranged by Elias, Savannah marched into Langford Tower. She bypassed the emergency executive meeting Preston had called and instead made her way to the 38th floor, to the office of Emily Choi. At 34, Emily was the youngest member of the board and had been handpicked by her mother, Monica, to oversee their family's significant stake in Langford Group. Her reputation as a financial savant with a firm moral code had quickly spread across the industry. Well, Emily said, gesturing for Savannah to sit. Quite the morning. Preston's been calling every board member, claiming you've had a mental breakdown. He submitted a formal request recommending you take a medical leave of absence. I figured as much, Savannah said, opening her portfolio. Before we get into that, I'd like to show you something. For the next 40 minutes, she laid everything out, methodically, calmly. Financial trails through Singapore shell companies, the falsified environmental reports in Indonesia, and finally, Russell Langford's codicil establishing shared authority between Preston and the Langford Foundation. Emily listened without interruption, her expression growing increasingly grim. When Savannah finished, she leaned back in her chair. If even half of this is accurate, Langford Group is on the brink of an existential crisis. Yes, Savannah said evenly, which is why I'm coming to you first, before I take this to the full board. Your family's investment is substantial, and your mother has always championed ethical governance above all else. Emily tapped her pen against the desk, processing. Preston will say the documents are fake, that you've fabricated this as a reaction to emotional trauma over his relationship with Madeline. He'll try, Savannah said, but the pregnant girlfriend? She's prepared to testify. She is? She's terrified. And based on what we now know about the Azure Horizon payments, her fear is justified. Savannah's voice didn't waver, but beneath her composed exterior was a gnawing tension. Every step forward was a calculated risk, and she knew how little room for error remained. Emily set her pen down with finality. I need to call my mother. As she dialed, Savannah's phone buzzed with a text from Elias. "Preston looking for you everywhere. Security instructed to bring you to his office under claim of medical concern." Another message followed seconds later. "Judge Callahan reviewed codicil, says it's legally sound. Preston filing emergency injunction, claiming you obtained it fraudulently." He was accelerating, weaponizing every tool at his disposal to shut her down before she could reach the full board. The text sent a shiver down her spine, not out of fear, but urgency. She could feel the trap tightening around her. There was no time for missteps. Not now. Emily finished her call and turned back to Savannah, her voice now sharp with conviction. "My mother agrees. We need to move, now." "The Troy family's support gives us momentum," Savannah said, "but we still need at least 7 votes to block Preston. Who else can we count on?" "Judge Callahan's with you," Emily said confidently. "Lucas might back you too, especially if Victoria does." "That's 4 with yours," Savannah said. "Preston already controls 3. 4 or 5 realistically," Emily corrected. "He's been working the newer members for months, private dinners, stock tips, golf trips." Savannah's phone buzzed again. "Preston claiming codicil invalid, says a newer agreement signed before Russell's death overrides it. Producing document now. Need original codicil copy immediately." The walls were closing in. Preston was attempting to outmaneuver her with forged documents and legal misdirection, anything to erase her leverage. "I need to get to Victoria," Savannah said, standing. "She has the original codicil." "You can't go yourself," Emily warned. "Security will intercept you before you get past the lobby." "Then we send someone he wouldn't expect." Savannah paused, then made the call. "Can you reach Lucas Langford directly, without alerting Preston?" By noon, Savannah had set up a temporary command center inside Elias Morton's private law office, 12 blocks from Langford Tower. Lucas Langford arrived, visibly tense. His typically pristine suit was rumpled, his face drawn. "This better be good," he muttered. "I just came from a meeting with Preston and the executive committee. They were reviewing your mental health file." "Did they vote?" Savannah asked. "Not yet," Lucas replied. "Preston tried, but Mother stalled it. She insisted on a second opinion from another medical expert." He loosened his tie. "She's buying you time, though I doubt she realizes just how important that time is." "She knows exactly what she's doing," Savannah said. "Did you bring what I asked for?" Lucas pulled a sealed envelope from the inside of his suit jacket. "Mother said to tell you she's sorry she didn't give this to you sooner. She thought Preston would eventually grow into the man Dad believed he could be." Inside was the original codicil to Russell Langford's will, along with a handwritten letter addressed to Savannah. "My dear Savannah, if you're reading this, then my son has forced a choice between family loyalty and company integrity. I always believed Preston's brilliance would one day be tempered by the humility that comes with true responsibility. If Victoria has given you this letter, then that belief has proven false. The enclosed documents place the future of Langford Group in your hands as much as his. Use this power not for retribution, but to safeguard the vision of what this company can become. With full faith in your judgment, Russell Langford." Savannah folded the letter with care and returned it to the envelope, her composure threatening to fracture under the weight of emotion. Russell had entrusted her with his life's work. She wouldn't fail him. "Lucas," she said, meeting his gaze, "I need to know where you stand, not as Preston's brother, but as an executive and board member of Langford Group." Lucas ran a hand through his hair, conflict plain across his face. "I love my brother, Savannah, but if what you're showing me is real, offshore accounts, environmental manipulation, this isn't family drama. This is criminal." "It is," Elias confirmed, spreading additional documents on the table. "The falsified data from the Indonesian sites alone is prosecutable fraud. If the contamination levels were reported accurately, the project would have been shut down months ago." Lucas studied the numbers. His expression darkened. "These surrounding communities, people are getting sick?" "Yes," Savannah said. "According to Madeline's original documentation, elevated respiratory issues, chemical burns, long-term exposure conditions. It's devastating." Lucas's inner turmoil hardened into clarity. Preston crossed a line. Dad would have never allowed this. "Then help us stop him," Savannah said. "The board meets in 2 hours. Preston thinks he's already won, that he has the votes to remove me and bury the evidence. What do you need me to do? At 1:45 p.m., Savannah sat alone in Elias's private office, scanning through her board presentation one final time. Lucas had returned to Langford Tower to coordinate with Emily Choi and Judge Callahan. Victoria had confirmed her possession of additional documentation proving the authenticity of Russell's codicil. The final pieces were in motion. Her phone rang, an unknown number. Savannah Langford. Mrs. Langford, this is Detective Frank Morgan with the NYPD Financial Crimes Division. I'm calling regarding some serious allegations that have been brought to our attention concerning your activities at Langford Group. Her blood ran cold. What allegations are we talking about, Detective? Embezzlement, fraud, falsification of corporate records, came the reply. We have a warrant for your financial documents and electronic devices. Officers are currently at your residence and at Langford Tower with the appropriate paperwork. Preston had escalated beyond internal sabotage. He was now weaponizing law enforcement, using his connections to lock her out of the board meeting entirely. I see, Savannah said, forcing her voice to stay calm. And who exactly brought these allegations to your attention? I'm not at liberty to say, ma'am. I need your current location so officers can serve you directly. Of course, Detective. I'm currently with my attorney, Elias Morton, at his office. We'll be happy to cooperate fully with your investigation. She gave the address, then added smoothly, though I'm curious, does your investigation include Langford Group's operations in Singapore and Indonesia? I have documentation that might interest your team. There was a pause. Ma'am, I'm just the initial contact. The lead investigators will review everything with you once they arrive. I look forward to it. One more thing, if I may. Does the name Azure Horizon mean anything to you? A longer silence. Not at this time. Please remain at your current location until officers arrive. As the call ended, Savannah lowered the phone with measured control, but inside her chest her heart thudded like a war drum. Preston hadn't just crossed a line, he'd burned every bridge behind him. This wasn't about defense anymore. It was survival. When the line disconnected, Savannah turned to Elias. Preston's using the NYPD to keep me from reaching the board. He's triggering a warrant based on fabricated charges to stall me out of the meeting. They'll be here any minute, Elias said grimly. What are the charges? The same ones he's planning to cite to the board. He wants to paint a picture. If the police are investigating, there must be something to it. The realization stung. Preston was playing to perception, not truth. And worse, it might work. Savannah stood, gathering her folders and device. We need to move, now. Is the backup ready? She asked. Elias nodded. Yes, but Preston's raised the stakes. This move, it's a point of no return. There was no going back the moment he brought Madeline to that dinner, Savannah said. He wanted a war? He's got one. There was no time left for hesitation. This was the final gambit, and she had to play it perfectly. As they prepared to leave through the law firm's rear exit, her phone buzzed. Text from Lucas. Emergency. Preston found backup flash drive in your office. Claims it proves you authorized Indonesia project. Board members wavering. Meeting started early. Followed by a second message. He's going to win, Savannah. He has documents with your signature authorizing everything. Savannah stared at the screen, stunned. Preston had forged her signature, falsified entire records, and timed the police visit to block her from defending herself. A slow burn of fury began rising in her, cold and precise. Preston hadn't just betrayed her. He had framed her. And now he was racing to finish the job. Elias, she said, her voice cool and precise. Preston just presented fraudulent documents, allegedly signed by me, authorizing the Indonesian operations. The older lawyer's expression darkened. If those signatures are fake, he's added forgery to the list. That's another criminal offense. We can prove this. Good, Savannah said, standing straighter. Call Judge Callahan. Tell him to halt any vote now. Until I arrive, Savannah said calmly. And Elias, tell Judge Callahan to record everything Preston says. Every word. As police sirens howled in the distance, growing louder near the law offices, Savannah made her decision. Preston thought he had checkmated her. He thought the warrant, the forged evidence, and the board maneuvering would end it. But he had forgotten one critical fact. Savannah Langford never entered a battle she hadn't already calculated how to win. Even if it meant appearing to lose, temporarily. The Langford Group's boardroom occupied the entire 50th floor of Langford Tower, a monument to Russell Langford's belief that the biggest decisions required space above the noise of the world. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Manhattan skyline, though today storm clouds gathered beyond the glass, casting the room in an ominous gray. Preston Langford stood at the head of the polished mahogany table, his face set in an expression of solemn concern as he addressed the 12 board members and senior executives seated before him. "As painful as this is for me personally, we cannot overlook the evidence in front of us," he said, gesturing toward the thick packets being distributed. "For months now, I've observed troubling behavior from my wife. Erratic decisions, paranoia, emotional instability. I attributed it to the strain of our personal situation." Victoria Langford, seated to his right, remained expressionless, while Lucas shifted uncomfortably beside her. Emily Choi scanned the psychiatric evaluation with open skepticism. Preston continued, his tone laced with manufactured gravity. "But when the financial discrepancies emerged, I had to consider a more disturbing possibility. The documents are clear. Savannah has used her position at the Langford Foundation to authorize improper actions while masking liability through false documentation." Judge Callahan leaned forward, his voice firm. "These are serious accusations, Preston. Where is Savannah? Shouldn't she have a chance to defend herself?" "I've asked myself the same question," Preston replied, feigning concern. "She vanished this morning after I confronted her. My security team believes she's meeting with Elias Morton, likely to craft a counter-narrative." He paused for effect. "The NYPD Financial Crimes Division has been notified. They are actively searching for her now, with a warrant in hand." Julian Marks cleared his throat. "Given the circumstances, I move that we temporarily suspend Savannah Langford from all Langford Group operations, including the Foundation, pending a full investigation." Preston nodded, his gratitude calculated. "I take no pleasure in this," Preston said, "but for the company's protection." The boardroom doors burst open. Every head turned as two uniformed NYPD officers stepped inside, followed closely by Detective Frank Morgan. Behind them was Elias Morton, grim, composed, and then, "Preston Langford," Morgan said, striding to the head of the table. "I need to speak with you about allegations that have come to our attention." Preston's confident expression faltered, briefly. "Of course, Detective, though we're in the middle of a critical board session. Perhaps this could be scheduled." "This won't wait," Morgan said firmly. Then, turning to the room, "Ladies and gentlemen, apologies for the disruption, but this matter pertains directly to the business before you." Preston's jaw tensed. "Whatever my wife has told you." "Actually," came a cool voice from the doorway, "I haven't told the detective anything. Yet." Savannah Langford stepped into the boardroom, her steps measured, her navy suit perfectly tailored. She held a leather portfolio and was flanked by a man in a dark suit no one recognized. "Savannah," Preston said, recovering fast, "you've spared the detective the trouble of finding you, though I wish you'd chosen a less theatrical moment to turn yourself in." "I'm not turning myself in," she said, voice like steel. "I've been cooperating with law enforcement, just not the ones you called." She gestured to the man beside her. "This is Special Agent Thomas Ramirez, FBI Financial Crimes Division, the real one, not the local precinct contact you apparently convinced to help you." The color drained from Preston's face. Detective Morgan stepped forward. "Mr. Langford, your call alleging your wife was embezzling funds triggered alerts in our system. When Mrs. Langford mentioned Azure Horizon during our brief conversation, it matched details from an ongoing federal investigation." "What federal investigation?" Preston barked, looking wildly between the officers. "This is absurd. My wife is clearly unstable." "Mr. Langford," Elias Morton interjected, voice calm but firm, "I suggest you stop talking. Everything you say in this room is being recorded, with the permission of Judge Callahan, who, as a board member, has the legal authority to consent to such recordings in a corporate context." Judge Callahan gave a terse nod. "I authorized it after Mr. Morton briefed me on the nature of the allegations against both parties." Preston gripped the back of his chair, his knuckles turning white. "This is a desperate attempt by my wife to deflect from her own misconduct," he snapped. "I have the documents. Her signature is on every authorization related to the Indonesia project." "That's precisely what I'd like to discuss," said Agent Ramirez, placing a briefcase on the table. Mrs. Langford approached us 3 weeks ago with concerns that fraudulent documentation had been created using her signature. As a precaution, we conducted forensic analysis on several of the most recent corporate filings. Agent Ramirez opened a folder and pulled out several documents bearing Savannah's signature. Our forensic analysts have determined these to be highly sophisticated forgeries, he said. The signatures were digitally lifted from authentic company documents and modified to fit the dates in question. Preston's expression darkened. This is outrageous. You expect this board to believe that my wife went to the FBI weeks ago, somehow anticipating that I would produce these documents? Not exactly, Savannah replied, stepping forward with calm authority. I went to the FBI after I discovered your Singapore operations 6 months ago. She laid her portfolio on the table and began distributing files to each board member. The offshore accounts, the money laundering, the ties to mining operations that use forced labor, all of it meticulously documented. Her voice was steady, but beneath her composed exterior was a storm, months of betrayal and deception fueling every word. She paused as the murmurs around the table grew. The FBI has been building its case ever since, with my full cooperation. Board members flipped through the pages in disbelief. Emily Choi looked up first, visibly shaken. These transfers, millions routed through shell companies. This isn't just aggressive accounting, this is criminal. It was necessary, Preston snapped, his mask cracking. The regulatory climate in those regions makes traditional operations impossible. Every major energy company does it. I just had the guts to leverage it fully. The room stiffened. A thick silence fell. What had once been whispers of concern now turned into stunned realization. He wasn't just guilty. He was unapologetic. Gasps swept the room at his blunt admission. Agent Ramirez raised an eyebrow and made a note. Savannah remained composed. When Preston brought Madeline Pierce to our family dinner and made it clear he planned to remove me from Langford Group, I realized he was accelerating. He needed me out before the quarterly audit could expose the discrepancies I'd already begun documenting. Her gaze didn't waver as she delivered the words, not with anger, but with the calm certainty of someone who knew she stood on truth. Victoria Langford finally spoke. Her voice was flat, cold. Is it true, Preston? You used that dinner to publicly humiliate Savannah? Just to cover up fraud? Preston's eyes darted across the table, assessing the collapse of his support. Mother, don't be naive. Dad built this company by taking risks. The only difference is, I aimed higher. Yes, I bent rules. So does every successful executive. He squared his shoulders, trying to recover his footing. As for Madeline, that was personal. Savannah failed to provide an heir for the Langford name. I found someone who could. How convenient, Savannah said dryly. She also signed anything you put in front of her. She understood business reality, Preston growled. Unlike you and your ethical posturing. He turned toward the rest of the board. Everything I've done has been to drive shareholder value. The Singapore and Indonesia deals will double our profits in 2 years. At what cost? Lucas asked quietly. The environmental reports you falsified. People are sick, Preston. Children. Acceptable losses, Preston said with a shrug. It's an emerging market. They'll be compensated. Eventually. The disgust in the room was palpable. Even board members who had once whispered support now recoiled in visible discomfort. Judge Callahan leaned back in his chair, his face twisted in disgust. Russell Langford would have never approved this. My father was weak, Preston's voice rose. He let sentimentality cap this company's potential. I've only corrected his mistakes. Savannah met Victoria's eyes across the table and received the faintest nod. Silent support, long overdue. Russell wasn't weak, Preston, Savannah said, her voice firm. He was principled, and far more strategic than you ever gave him credit for. She removed a sealed document from her portfolio and passed it to Judge Callahan. This is the original codicil to Russell Langford's will, she said. It's been held in safekeeping by Victoria Langford until now. It establishes a special class of voting shares split between the CEO and the Langford Foundation, creating dual authority over all major corporate decisions. Her voice was unwavering, but inside, her chest tightened with the gravity of what she was unleashing. This was Russell's final safeguard, his last silent vote of no confidence in his own son. As Judge Callahan reviewed the document, Preston's face twisted with fury. "This is a fake," he shouted. "My father gave me full control. I was there when he signed everything." "Preston," Victoria cut in coldly. "1 week before he died, Russell saw what you were becoming. He put safeguards in place because he knew." Judge Callahan looked up from the pages. "The document appears authentic, notarized, properly witnessed. If this codicil is valid, and I believe it is, then Preston has been acting without proper authority since Russell's death." Gasps and exchanged glances swept the boardroom. Even Preston's staunchest allies were suddenly uncertain, their confidence shaken by the weight of legal confirmation. Preston slammed his fist onto the table. "This is insanity. I am Langford Group." "You've tripled market cap in 5 years," Savannah countered evenly, "while quietly building a criminal operation that could destroy everything your father stood for." She turned to the board. "I'm not asking you to take my word. The evidence is in your hands. The FBI investigation will continue no matter what happens here today." Her gaze swept across the room, steady and unblinking. "What I am asking is that you honor Russell Langford's vision for accountable leadership of the company that bears his name." The elevator chimed, and the doors slid open again. Madeline Pierce stepped into the room, escorted by Emily Choi's assistant. She looked pale, but resolute. Preston's expression morphed from fury to quick calculation. "Madeline, sweetheart," he said smoothly, "I'm glad you're here. Savannah's been making some alarming accusations. The board needs to hear about her state of mind these past few months." Madeline held his gaze without flinching. "Actually, I'm here to confirm everything Savannah said." Her voice rang with quiet steel, slicing through the charged air like a blade. The entire boardroom seemed to hold its breath. Preston's voice dropped to a growl. "Madeline, I've given the FBI every document you had me sign," she said clearly, "including the ones you told me were just routine authorizations that turned out to be bribes, falsified environmental records, and God knows what else." Madeline placed protective hands over her pregnant belly. "I won't let my child's father be a man who poisons other people's children for profit." Preston snapped. "You stupid. Do you even realize what you've done?" He lunged at her, rage overtaking what little control he had left, but was immediately restrained by 2 security officers. Agent Ramirez stepped forward, calm and firm. "Mr. Langford, I suggest you stand down immediately." Julian Marks, sensing the tides shifting, hurried to separate himself from the wreckage. "I had no knowledge of these illegal operations," he said. Preston concealed the full extent of these activities from the financial team. "That's a lie," Preston shouted, struggling in the officer's grip. "Julian authorized every transfer. He built the shell company system." "And that," Agent Ramirez said dryly, "is why we strongly recommend not speaking without legal counsel." He turned to the officers. "Take Mr. Marks to a separate room for questioning." As Julian was escorted out, his face pale and drawn, Victoria Langford slowly rose to her feet. Though her eyes shimmered with unshed tears, her voice was composed. "As the largest individual shareholder of Langford Group and widow of its founder, I move that this board immediately vote to remove Preston Langford as CEO, based on evidence of criminal misconduct and breach of fiduciary duty." Emily Choi stood. "I second the motion." "And I move," she continued, "that we appoint an interim leadership committee, chaired by Savannah Langford, in accordance with Russell Langford's codicil, until a full investigation is completed." Judge Callahan, now acting as interim chairman, nodded. "All in favor of removing Preston Langford as CEO of Langford Group, effective immediately?" One by one, hands were raised around the table. Lucas was the last to move, his eyes locked on his brother Torn. But after a long pause, his hand rose too. "The motion passes unanimously," Judge Callahan announced. "Preston Langford is hereby removed as Chief Executive Officer of Langford Group. Security will escort him from the premises after initial questioning is completed." Preston's face twisted with hatred. "You think you've won?" he hissed at Savannah. "This company is in my blood. You're nothing but an outsider who wormed her way in by seducing a dying old man's son." Savannah looked at him, calm and unshaken. "Russell Langford didn't trust you with his legacy, Preston. He trusted me, and that's something your ego will never allow you to understand." As Preston was led away, still throwing threats over his shoulder, the boardroom was silent. The storm outside finally broke. Rain battered the tall windows. Thunder rolled over Manhattan. Victoria crossed the room to Savannah, her composure returning like armor. "Russell would be proud of you today," she said quietly, "and ashamed of what his son became." Savannah gently took the older woman's hand. "Preston isn't beyond redemption, Victoria. He needs to be held accountable, but maybe this will wake him up." Victoria's smile was faint, tinged with sorrow. "You're kinder than I am, my dear. You always have been." Savannah straightened her shoulders and turned to the remaining board members. "Now," she said, "shall we discuss how to move forward? Langford Group has weathered crises before, and it will weather this one." As the board turned to the difficult task of assessing the damage Preston had inflicted, Savannah stepped aside with Madeline, who looked drained by the confrontation. "Are you all right?" Savannah asked gently. Madeline nodded. "I think so. It's just, this wasn't how I imagined it would end. When Preston and I first—" She trailed off, searching for the right words. "When you thought it was love?" Savannah offered. "Was it love?" Madeline said quietly. "Or was I just another asset, something useful for him to acquire?" She looked up, a new respect in her eyes. "You saw through him, didn't you?" "Not at first," Savannah admitted. "I loved him once, deeply. But he changed, or maybe he just finally stopped pretending." Madeline placed a hand on her belly, feeling a kick. "What happens now?" she asked. "To Langford Group? To Preston? To us?" "Langford Group will survive," Savannah said with calm conviction. "Though we have a long road ahead, repairing what Preston broke. And Preston will face consequences, legal ones, the extent of which will depend on whether he cooperates." She paused before answering the most delicate question. "As for us, that's your decision, Madeline. Your child is a Langford, regardless of what happens to Preston. If you want to be part of this family, there's a place for you. If you'd prefer distance, I'll ensure you and your child are cared for, fully." Tears welled in Madeline's eyes. "Why would you do that? After everything, after the dinner, letting him use me to hurt you?" "Because that child is innocent," Savannah said simply. "And because I suspect you were as much a victim of Preston's manipulation as anyone." Before Madeline could respond, Emily Choi approached them. "I hate to interrupt," she said, "but the FBI needs formal statements from both of you, and we've got some heavy lifting to do before the markets open tomorrow." Savannah nodded, feeling the weight of her new role settle onto her shoulders. Langford Group had just endured its most profound crisis since its founding, and she now stood at its helm. The board's vote had removed Preston, but the real work, rebuilding what he dismantled, was just beginning. As she returned to the meeting, Savannah caught her reflection in the rain-slicked glass of the tower's windows. For the first time in years, she didn't see Preston Langford's polished corporate wife. She saw the woman Russell Langford had recognized from the beginning, a leader worthy of his trust, a guardian of his legacy, a woman who could do what his own son would not. The storm raged on outside, but within Langford Tower, a new era had begun. The next 72 hours flew by in a blur of crisis response. Savannah moved into the CEO's office, not Preston's glossy penthouse suite, but Russell Langford's original space on the 49th floor. Preserved like a time capsule since his death, it had long stood as a monument to the company's origins. Now, it had meaning again. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. "The markets are stabilizing," Emily Choi reported, setting a tablet on the desk. "We're still down 18% from last week, but the bleeding stopped." Savannah nodded, reviewing the numbers. The press conference she'd held the morning after Preston's removal had been nothing short of a masterclass in damage control. She had been transparent in every briefing, outlining the discovery of financial improprieties while emphasizing that the board had responded quickly and decisively. Framing the FBI investigation as one initiated by Langford Group itself, a technically true statement, as she was still a Langford, had helped recast the narrative as one of responsible governance rather than corruption. "The Asia markets are actually up 2% overnight," Emily Choi reported, scrolling through her tablet. "Your pledge to remediate the environmental damage in Indonesia is gaining traction globally. ESG analysts are calling this a textbook example of corporate course correction." "Have we received the preliminary impact report yet?" Savannah asked, pulling up another file on her screen. Dr. Lynn's team arrived yesterday, Emily said. Initial findings confirm everything Madeline documented. Groundwater contamination, levels 12 to 15 times above the safety threshold in multiple areas. Her expression darkened. 3 surrounding villages are already reporting increased rates of respiratory illness and skin conditions consistent with prolonged chemical exposure. Savannah closed her eyes for a moment, centering herself against the familiar wave of guilt and fury. Authorize whatever medical aid they need, immediately, and begin planning long-term remediation and community support. It's already in motion, Emily replied. Projected costs? I don't care what it costs, Savannah cut in firmly. Those people are suffering because Langford Group prioritized profit over protection. Make it right. A knock at the door interrupted them. Elias Morton stepped inside carrying a heavy legal binder. The board has unanimously approved the new corporate governance framework, he announced, placing the document before her. Dual leadership, you as CEO, Lucas as COO, enhanced oversight for all international operations, and Victoria has agreed to serve as interim board chair. A small smile tugged at his lips. Her exact words were, just until Savannah finishes cleaning up this mess. Savannah signed the document slowly, feeling the symbolic weight of Russell Langford's legacy in every stroke. The new governance structure reflected her core belief that unchecked power, like Preston's, inevitably led to corruption. Langford Group's future would be built on distributed authority, transparency, and accountability. What's the latest on Preston? She asked, handing the signed pages back. Elias's expression turned grim. He's out on bail, $5 million. Victoria covered it. Travel restricted, assets frozen pending trial, but he's already moved into his Manhattan condo. And he's plotting his return, Emily added, tapping an email open on her device. This came in 20 minutes ago, sent to multiple board members. Savannah read the message without surprise. Preston was claiming she had engineered a coup, motivated by jealousy over Madeline. He painted the financial irregularities as common industry practices, said Savannah had selectively weaponized them to seize power, and that the environmental fallout in Indonesia had been exaggerated to sway public sentiment. Has anyone responded? Savannah asked. Not yet, Emily replied, but 3 board members forwarded it to me almost immediately. I take that as a good sign. And the others? Emily hesitated. 2 haven't responded at all. That worries me. Hansen and Fujimoto were always closer to Preston than to Russell. Savannah nodded, making a mental note to schedule one-on-one meetings with both. Preston would be working every possible angle to destabilize her leadership, and she couldn't afford to leave even the smallest crack vulnerable. What about Madeline? She asked. Has Preston tried to contact her? Several times, Elias confirmed. She's filed for a temporary restraining order, citing his behavior at the board meeting as evidence of potential threat. It was granted this morning. Savannah absorbed the information with mixed emotions. Part of her, one she wasn't proud of, felt a grim satisfaction at Preston's growing isolation. But another part saw clearly the tragedy of it all. A child was about to be born into this web of betrayal, litigation, and corporate warfare. She's due in 6 weeks, Savannah murmured. We need to make sure she has everything she needs. Emily raised an eyebrow. You're remarkably generous to the woman Preston used to humiliate you in front of the entire board. Madeline was a pawn in Preston's game, Savannah replied. So was I. The difference is, I see the game for what it is. She's carrying a Langford heir, Russell's grandchild. Whatever happens with Preston, that child deserves stability and support. As if summoned by name, Savannah's assistant appeared in the doorway. Madeline Pierce is here for your meeting. The woman who entered was barely recognizable from the poised, polished figure Preston had paraded at the infamous family dinner. Without his control, Madeline now looked natural. Hair tied back, makeup minimal, her clothes comfortable instead of curated. Thank you for seeing me, she said as she lowered herself carefully into a chair. I know how busy you must be. You're always welcome here, Savannah said gently, nodding for Elias and Emily to give them privacy. When the door closed, Savannah asked, How are you feeling? Like a beached whale, Madeline said with a faint smile. Physically, she paused. Emotionally, that's complicated. She rubbed her belly absently. Preston's lawyer called again. They want to discuss custody arrangements before the baby arrives. And how do you feel about that? Tears welled in Madeline's eyes. I don't know. Part of me wants to keep Preston as far away from this child as possible, after everything I've learned. But another part feels guilty, like I'd be denying the baby a father. Savannah handed her a tissue. Whatever you decide, Langford Group will support you, professionally and personally. That's actually why I came, Madeline said, dabbing her eyes. The FBI agent I've been working with suggested I consider relocating after the baby's born, possibly with a new identity. They're concerned about retaliation from Preston or people connected to Azure Horizon. Savannah's face hardened. That wouldn't surprise me. But here's the thing, Madeline continued. I don't want to disappear. I don't want my child growing up in hiding, always looking over their shoulder. She straightened in her chair, a quiet fire in her eyes. I want to stay, Madeline said firmly. I want to testify against Preston. I want to help make things right for the people hurt in Indonesia. Savannah studied the younger woman with renewed respect. That's a brave decision. Is it brave, Madeline murmured, or just right? I signed those papers. I didn't understand everything they meant, but I knew something felt off. I chose not to ask too many questions. That was my choice. I'm not innocent. Few of us are, Savannah admitted. I suspected something was wrong with Preston's operations for months before I finally acted. I told myself I needed more evidence, that confronting him too early would only push everything further underground. But part of me was afraid to face the truth about what my husband had become. The honesty between them opened a quiet, unexpected bond. Both women had been manipulated by Preston Langford in different ways, both now determined to undo the damage he'd caused. I have a proposal, Savannah said, sitting forward slightly. Langford Group is launching a new compliance and ethics division, so this never happens again. With your background and first-hand experience with how these schemes were executed, you'd be an ideal consultant for the team. Madeline blinked, clearly surprised. You'd trust me with that? I think you've earned it, Savannah replied. You cooperated with the FBI. You're willing to testify, even though it will cost you. That shows integrity. She paused. And who better to design safeguards than someone who knows exactly where the cracks are? For the first time since they'd met, Madeline smiled, genuinely. I'd like that very much. As Madeline left, Savannah turned back to the mountain of work waiting on her desk. The Indonesian remediation strategy needed final approval. The legal team was preparing to unwind the Singapore operations without triggering a wave of new investigations. And in just 3 weeks, she'd need to deliver a quarterly earnings report that struck the balance between reassuring investors and acknowledging the gravity of the issues they were fixing. Underneath all of it lay deeper, personal questions. The impending divorce from Preston, the media attention shadowing her every move, and perhaps most profoundly, who was Savannah Langford now that she was no longer Preston Langford's perfect corporate wife? 2 weeks later, Savannah sat across from Preston for the first time since his removal as CEO. The meeting, arranged by their attorneys, was held in a neutral conference room at Elias Morton's law firm, not at Langford Tower. Preston had lost weight. His tailored suit hung looser than usual. But his eyes, those hadn't changed. Calculating intelligence still present in Preston's eyes. The same cool, strategic mind that once made him a powerful CEO, and now a dangerous adversary. You're looking well, Savannah, he said, his tone almost conversational. Power suits you. Thank you, she replied neutrally. I appreciate you agreeing to this meeting. Did I have a choice? He countered. Your lawyers have rejected every settlement proposal my team submitted, because those proposals all included you retaining significant control over Langford Group's operations, Savannah said, which is unacceptable given the circumstances. Preston leaned back in his chair, studying her carefully. Circumstances being that you orchestrated my ouster using cherry-picked data and an outdated codicil signed by my father while on medication. Savannah didn't rise to the bait. We're not here to relitigate the board's decision, Preston. We're here to discuss a path forward that minimizes damage for everyone involved. Ah, yes, the greater good. Always your favorite sanctuary, he smirked, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. So what does this path forward look like in your gospel? Me surrendering all claims? Pleading guilty to spare Langford Group the headlines? Perhaps a tearful public apology for daring to run the company based on market realities instead of your idealistic delusions. Elias Morton cleared his throat, cautioning, but Savannah raised a hand, signaling him to hold back. Actually, she said evenly, I'm offering you a chance at redemption. That seemed to catch him off guard. Redemption? How charmingly biblical. The federal prosecutors are willing to consider a plea agreement, Savannah continued, composed. In exchange for full cooperation in untangling the Singapore network and identifying everyone involved in the Indonesian environmental fraud, they'll recommend reduced charges, focused on financial misconduct, not the more serious environmental crimes. Preston's eyes narrowed. And what would this fantasy plea deal mean for me? House arrest? Fines? A TED Talk on ethics? Probation? Substantial financial penalties, a 10-year ban on serving as an officer or director of any public company, she said without flinching. But no prison time. A long silence followed as Preston processed the offer. His attorney leaned in to whisper, but Preston waved him off. "And Langford Group?" he asked finally. "What happens to my ownership?" "Your shares would be held in a blind trust for the length of the probation," Savannah said. "You'd receive dividend income, but no voting rights, no operational access." "Effectively neutralizing me," he muttered, "while keeping up appearances that I'm still a stakeholder." "And Madeline? The baby?" "That's between you and Madeline," Savannah replied. "But any arrangement must respect the current restraining order. Langford Group will ensure your child receives all benefits due a Langford heir, regardless of your legal status." Preston stared at her, something shifting behind his expression. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. "You've won. You've got the company, the board, the moral high ground. Why offer me a lifeline at all?" It was the question Savannah had been asking herself from the moment she drafted the proposal. The answer had come during a late-night conversation with Victoria, who'd shared stories about a younger Preston, brilliant, driven, not yet poisoned by power or ambition. "Because despite everything," Savannah said now, her voice quiet, "you're still Russell Langford's son." And Russell believed in second chances. He believed people could learn from their mistakes and choose better paths. He never gave up on you, Preston. Not even at the end. For a fleeting moment, something flickered across Preston's face. A vulnerability, a glimpse of who he might have been had his choices taken him elsewhere. But it vanished quickly, replaced by his usual armor of cynicism. "How touching," he said coolly, "and completely transparent. You're not offering this because of some deep loyalty to my father's memory. You're doing it because a public trial would harm Langford Group no matter how it ends." "This offer benefits everyone," Savannah acknowledged. "That doesn't make it less genuine. Russell taught me that the best solutions are the ones where people keep their dignity." Preston laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "Dignity? You think there's dignity in becoming a corporate eunuch, sitting on the sidelines while you dismantle everything I built? There's dignity in accountability, Preston, in owning your mistakes and working to repair the damage, like the mistakes in Indonesia." His eyes darkened. Those villages with their suspiciously timed health issues, right when you needed leverage. Elias Morton cut in sharply. "That's enough. The environmental damage is well documented by independent sources. Denying it only undermines whatever credibility you still have." Preston clenched his jaw, but said nothing more. He knew he'd gone too far. "The offer stands for 72 hours, Savannah said, rising. "After that, prosecutors will pursue the full case, including the environmental crimes." As she gathered her documents, Preston spoke again, voice low and even. "You know, Savannah, I underestimated you for years. I saw what I wanted to see, the perfect corporate wife, the ethical face for my pragmatism. I never saw the strategist, the one who was right in front of me the whole time." "That was your mistake," she replied evenly, "not seeing people for who they really are." "And who are you now?" he asked, watching her at the door. "Now that you've taken it all?" She paused. "I'm the woman your father trusted to protect his legacy. Nothing more, nothing less." Preston's bitter laugh followed her out. "We'll see how long that lasts, darling. Power changes everyone, even perfect Savannah." 3 weeks later, Madeline Pierce gave birth to a healthy baby boy, 7 pounds 9 ounces, with a shock of dark hair unmistakably bearing the Langford mark. She named him Richard Thomas Pierce, honoring the grandfather he'd never meet, while leaving off the Langford surname altogether. A quiet, deliberate statement about her relationship with the family that child had entered. Savannah visited the hospital the next day, bringing a small silver frame engraved with the baby's initials and birth date. Inside was a photo of Russell Langford, taken the day Langford Tower opened, his proudest professional moment. "For when he's older," Savannah explained, placing the gift gently on the bedside table. "So he knows where he comes from?" Madeline said softly, holding her sleeping son against her chest. "No matter what path he chooses." She looked exhausted, but radiant. "Preston called his lawyer," she added after a pause. "He's requesting a paternity test." "That's his right," Savannah said gently, though she cast a glance at the baby's dark hair. "But I don't think anyone who sees him would question his parentage." "It's not about confirmation," Madeline replied, lightly stroking her son's head. "It's about control. The first move in what'll probably be years of legal battles over Richard's future." "You don't have to go through that alone," Savannah reminded her. "Langford Group's legal team is fully available to you, and Victoria's expressed interest in being part of her grandson's life, separate from Preston's situation." Madeline looked up, her eyes tired and raw. "Why are you all being so kind to me, after everything that happened?" "Because that's what family does," Savannah said simply. "And no matter how complicated things are between the adults in this story, this child is family." The baby stirred, opening his eyes, dark blue like most newborns, but with an intensity that reminded Savannah instantly of Russell Langford. Looking at this child, pure, untouched by the legacy of betrayal, ambition, and redemption, Savannah felt her sense of purpose crystallize again. This wasn't just about correcting Preston's mistakes or honoring Russell's legacy. It was about creating something worthy of this next generation. A Langford Group that little Richard could one day be proud to inherit, if he chose to carry that name. 6 months after Preston's removal, Langford Group hosted its annual shareholder meeting. Under Savannah's leadership, the company had rebounded with remarkable strength. The stock price had recovered, within 5% of its pre-scandal peak. The Indonesian remediation initiative had achieved early success, with medical aid delivered and ecological restoration progressing ahead of schedule. The Singapore operations had been dismantled legally, with Preston's full cooperation as part of his plea deal. Preston himself had all but vanished from public life. After accepting what legal analysts described as a surprisingly lenient agreement, he retreated to the Langford family estate in Connecticut, serving out house arrest and probation. The financial press had mostly moved on, occasionally citing the Langford saga as a prime case study in crisis management and corporate reform. And now Savannah stood at the podium in Langford Tower's auditorium, facing a packed room of shareholders, analysts, and reporters. 6 months ago, she began, Langford Group faced an existential crisis. The values Russell Langford built this company on had been compromised. Trust had been broken, and real harm had been done to the communities that rely on us to be responsible stewards. The room was silent, every eye on Savannah as she continued. "Today, I can report that we've made significant progress in addressing those failures and rebuilding that trust. Our environmental remediation project in Indonesia has become a model for corporate accountability during crisis. Our new governance framework ensures that no single executive can again compromise this company's ethical foundation. And our financial results prove what Russell Langford always believed, that doing business the right way isn't just morally correct, it's economically sound." She presented the quarterly report. Revenues exceeding forecasts, investor confidence rebounding, and Langford Group's rebranded identity centered on sustainable, long-term value. The renewable energy initiatives Preston had shelved were now the company's growth engine. The Langford Foundation had expanded its mission, focusing on environmental justice for communities impacted by industrial development. Savannah concluded, Langford Group remains committed to Russell Langford's founding vision, that profit and purpose can and must coexist, that corporations owe a duty to the communities they touch, that real success isn't measured by quarterly returns, but by generational impact. The applause that followed was long and sincere. As Savannah stepped down from the podium, Victoria Langford approached. Elegant as always, her tailored suit a quiet statement of authority that respected her new role as board chair without encroaching on Savannah's spotlight. "Masterfully done," Victoria murmured. "Russell would be proud." "Thank you," Savannah said, her voice soft with emotion. "Have you visited Preston?" she asked after a pause. Victoria's expression tightened. "Last weekend. He's adjusting. The restrictions irritate him, naturally. But I believe the isolation has forced reflection in a way nothing else ever could." "And the baby?" Savannah asked. "He's seen him twice, under supervised visitation. Madeline has been remarkably generous, considering." Victoria hesitated, then added, "He asks about you." Savannah raised an eyebrow. "Preston? Not directly? He couches it in questions about leadership decisions, strategic directions, but it's you he's really asking about." "Professional curiosity," Savannah said, "or searching for cracks he can exploit once his restrictions end." Victoria studied her carefully. "Perhaps. Or perhaps he's finally realizing what he lost, not just the company, but you." Savannah didn't respond right away. The divorce had been finalized 3 months earlier, a surprisingly uneventful process. With Preston's legal entanglements and the ironclad prenuptial agreement Russell had insisted upon, there had been little for him to contest. "The man I married doesn't exist anymore, Victoria," she said at last. "If he ever did." "People can change, Savannah. Sometimes tragedy forces growth that would never happen otherwise." Before she could answer, Emily Choi approached, flanked by 2 major investors eager to discuss the company's expansion into sustainable battery tech. Savannah turned to greet them. Langford Group's future already waiting in the next conversation. The conversation with Victoria had remained unfinished, but her words lingered in Savannah's mind for days. 2 weeks later, she found herself driving to the Langford family estate in Connecticut. Officially, she told herself it was a courtesy visit. As CEO, it was appropriate to personally update the company's largest individual shareholder, even if Preston's voting rights were now held in trust, stripped from him for the duration of his probation. In truth, she wasn't entirely sure why she'd come. The security guard at the gate checked her ID, made a call, then waved her through. The long driveway curved through early autumn foliage, the maple trees a blaze of color against the rolling hills. Russell Langford had bought the property decades ago, imagining it as a retreat for future generations of Langfords to gather. Preston had once treated it as a showpiece, hosting lavish weekends for investors and executives. Now it felt quieter, more subdued. Preston stood waiting on the front steps as she pulled up. His jeans and sweater were a far cry from his usual tailored suits. The electronic ankle monitor peeked from beneath his pant leg, a subtle but potent reminder of his restrictions. "Savannah," he greeted, surprise evident despite having been notified. "This is unexpected. I was in the area for a meeting with some battery tech partners," she said. The excuse sounded thin, even to her. New Haven was nearly an hour away. Preston didn't challenge it. "Would you like to come in? Mrs. Harrington can bring some tea." The housekeeper had been with the Langford family for more than 2 decades, one of the few stable presences left in Preston's current life. Savannah nodded and followed him into the grand foyer, its sweeping staircase and glittering chandelier just as she remembered. But the house felt different now. More lived in. Preston had once used the estate as a showroom, entertaining and performing. Now, something quieter lingered in the space. "You've redecorated," she noted, observing that many of the flashy art pieces had been replaced with simpler works and family photos. "Mother's doing," Preston said, leading her into the sunroom that overlooked the gardens. She said the house needed humanizing, whatever that means. They sat in silence until Mrs. Harrington arrived with the tea. When she had withdrawn, Preston spoke first. "Why are you really here, Savannah?" She thought about offering a corporate update. Instead, she told the truth. "I'm not entirely sure," she admitted. "Victoria said you'd been asking about the company. I thought maybe we should talk directly." Preston's mouth curled into a half-smile. "Checking to see if your corporate prisoner is plotting revenge from his gilded cage? Are you? Would I tell you if I was?" He took a sip of tea, watching her over the rim of the cup. "You look well. Leadership clearly suits you." "It's challenging," Savannah admitted, "but fulfilling in ways I hadn't anticipated." The stocks recovered well. The situation in Indonesia is under control. Madeline says the new compliance structure is solid. Preston set down his teacup. You've done well, Savannah, better than I expected. Coming from him, it was as close to a compliment as she was likely to get. Thank you, she said evenly. That means something, coming from you. Does it? He asked, eyes narrowing with interest. I would have thought my opinion no longer mattered. Your judgment was never the issue, Preston. It was your methods. Ah, yes, my moral failings. He leaned back in his chair. Have you come to see if I've reformed? Found salvation in house arrest? Discovered a conscience worthy of the Langford name? The sarcasm was sharp, familiar. His classic defense when vulnerability crept too close. Savannah didn't take the bait. I came because, for better or worse, we were partners for a decade. Because we built something together, even if it ended badly. And because I thought you might want to speak with someone who isn't legally required to report your every word to the authorities. Preston studied her carefully. For a long time. Eventually, the tension in his shoulders eased slightly. It's the isolation, he admitted. Not the bracelet or the house arrest, but the silence. People I considered friends haven't returned a single call since the plea deal went public. Fair-weather friends, Savannah said. Russell always warned us about them. He warned us about a lot of things, Preston said, gazing out at the garden, its colors fading under approaching winter. I should have listened more. I've had time to think these past months, about what I built, what I broke, what I lost. Savannah said nothing, letting him continue. I've seen the baby twice, he said finally. Richard Thomas. He looks like a Langford. Yes, Savannah agreed softly. Madeline says she's open to letting me be part of his life someday. Supervised, of course, if I prove I can be trustworthy. He nearly stumbled on the word, as if the idea of earning trust still felt unnatural. That's generous of her. It is. He looked back at her, something complicated in his expression. She speaks highly of you, you know, says you've been more supportive than she ever expected. More than she deserved. He paused. Why would you do that, Savannah, after how I used her, to hurt you? It was the same question Victoria had asked, the same one Emily had silently wondered, and one Savannah had asked herself more than once in the quiet of sleepless nights. The answer came to her now, calm and clear. Because compassion isn't a zero-sum game, Preston. Being kind to Madeline and her son doesn't diminish me, or excuse what you did. It's just the right thing to do. Preston looked away, his gaze fixed on the garden beyond the window. The silence between them stretched, filled with unspoken regrets and the weight of their shared history. I never thought it would end like this, he murmured. Not with you at the helm, and me here. Savannah offered a faint smile. Neither did I, but perhaps it's for the best. He nodded slowly. Maybe, time will tell. She stood preparing to leave. Take care, Preston. You too, Savannah. As she walked away, the autumn leaves outside began to fall, signaling the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Preston shook his head slowly. You really believe that, don't you? That doing the right thing matters more than winning? I believe they're not mutually exclusive, Savannah replied. Langford Group is stronger now because we embraced ethical operations, not despite them. The market responded to our transparency in Indonesia. Our new governance model has attracted investors who care about long-term sustainability, not just quarterly spikes. A convenient alignment of virtue and profit, Preston said dryly. Russell would be thrilled to see his philosophy so perfectly validated. It's not always perfect, Savannah admitted. There are trade-offs, tough decisions, competing priorities, but the foundation matters. The values we build on determine what can actually endure. Something shifted in Preston's expression. Not full acceptance, but something quieter. Maybe openness to perspectives he would have mocked 6 months ago. I've been reading some of my father's early business journals, he said, motioning toward a leather-bound notebook on a nearby table. From when he first started pivoting toward renewables, the backlash he faced, the risks he took. I never understood how much courage that required. He was a visionary, Savannah agreed. He saw the future of this industry before most of his peers. And I was so hell-bent on proving I could outperform him, Preston said softly, that I tore down everything he built. His admission hung between them, perhaps the most honest self-assessment she'd ever heard from him. As the light outside began to fade, their conversation shifted. Less tense, more practical. They discussed the battery tech initiative Savannah was leading, Victoria's surprising finesse as board chair, James's growing confidence as COO. It wasn't forgiveness, but it felt like an armistice, a quiet acknowledgement that, despite everything, they shared history and a legacy. When Savannah finally stood to leave, Preston walked her to her car. The ankle monitor beeped faintly as they neared the invisible boundary of his permitted zone. "Will you come again?" he asked, voice carefully neutral. "For company updates? Quarterly?" Savannah said after a moment's thought, "To align with the business cycle." Preston nodded, accepting the terms. As she opened her door, he added, "Savannah, for what it's worth, I'm sorry. Not just for the company, for us, for what I destroyed." The words seemed to cost him something. It wasn't redemption. Savannah didn't pretend the man she'd divorced was suddenly gone, but it was a start. "Thank you for saying that," she replied quietly. "Goodbye, Preston." As she pulled away, Savannah glanced in the rearview mirror. Preston Langford, former CEO, disgraced executive, ex-husband, stood alone at the edge of the estate, framed by the grand house that now served as both his sanctuary and his prison. The road curved through the golden New England landscape, leading Savannah back toward Langford Tower and the ongoing work of rebuilding. Whatever Preston's future held, redemption, reformation, or simply quiet resignation, her path was clear. She would continue honoring Russell Langford's legacy with strength and compassion, guiding Langford Group to remain true to its founding values while evolving with the times. And perhaps one day, the wounds would soften enough for Preston to find a meaningful place in the Langford family again, not as the titan he once fancied himself, but as a man who had learned through painful loss what hubris costs, and who was trying, however imperfectly, to be better. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a door left slightly ajar, a fragile possibility that even broken things could be mended. 2 years later, the terrace of Savannah Langford's Manhattan penthouse overlooked Central Park in full spring bloom. A small crowd gathered for little Richard's second birthday celebration. The group was an unlikely blend, emblematic of the Langford family's reinvention, just as Langford Group itself had transformed. Young Richard toddled across the terrace, wobbling with toddler determination. His dark hair and piercing stare were unmistakably Langford, despite the Pierce surname he bore. Madeline watched her son proudly. Her journey, from manipulated mistress to respected leader, was complete. Now director of ethics and compliance at Langford Group, she had co-designed the governance systems hailed in business journals as an industry benchmark. Victoria Langford, ever poised at 74, supervised the birthday cake setup, while James and Catherine entertained their kids alongside Richard. The scene radiated ease and warmth, a striking contrast to the cold, choreographed formality of family events under Preston's rule. Savannah stood to the side, glass in hand, absorbing the moment with a quiet sense of satisfaction, and something like wistful reflection. Langford Group hadn't just survived Preston's scandalous downfall. It had emerged stronger, cleaner, more committed than ever to the ideals Russell had championed. Quite the family portrait, came Elizabeth Choi's voice as she joined Savannah with 2 glasses of champagne. Not exactly what anyone would have predicted 2 years ago. "Life rarely follows predictable paths," Savannah replied, accepting the glass. "Speaking of unpredictable," Elizabeth said with a knowing smile, "the board approved the acquisition unanimously. Azure Horizon is officially a Langford subsidiary." A grim smile touched Savannah's lips. "And the audit? Completed last week. Every client, every operation, every offshore account verified and documented," Elizabeth confirmed, her tone sharpening. "Including the evidence that Preston did, in fact, use them for far more than financial manipulation." Savannah nodded. She had anticipated that outcome. Azure Horizon, the covert security and fixing firm Preston once used for his dirtiest work, had been bleeding clients since the Langford scandal broke. When its stock collapsed, Savannah had quietly started acquiring it piece by piece through shell entities. Yesterday, Langford Group took controlling interest. "And what happens to that evidence now?" Elizabeth asked softly. Savannah's gaze didn't waver. "It goes to the federal prosecutors," Savannah replied, her tone calm and resolute. "As per our legal obligation, once criminal activity was confirmed, Elizabeth studied her, eyes sharp. This was your plan all along, wasn't it? The quarterly visits to Preston, the carefully measured thawing of relations, those subtle suggestions that he might one day return to some role at Langford Group. It was all to keep him complacent while you hunted down every last connection to his crimes. Savannah's expression didn't shift. Preston taught me something valuable, she said coolly. Never reveal your strategy until the game is already won. Across the terrace, Madeline approached, little Richard in her arms. Are we interrupting? Not at all, Savannah said, her features softening immediately. I believe the birthday boy is due a gift from his godmother. The toddler reached eagerly for Savannah, chubby hands tugging at her pearl necklace, the same one that had belonged to Russell Langford's mother. Savannah now wore it as a quiet symbol of the legacy she protected. He's completely smitten with you, Madeline said with a smile. It's like he senses the connection. Children often see what adults overlook, Victoria Langford remarked, joining them. Russell used to say, a Langford always knows their own. The party continued into the evening, filled with genuine warmth, despite the undercurrent of calculated justice only Savannah and Elizabeth fully understood. As guests drifted out and the staff began cleaning up, Savannah's phone buzzed. She stepped into her home office and answered quietly. Elias? It's done, the aging attorney confirmed. Federal marshals took Preston into custody 20 minutes ago. And? He didn't take it well. He looked genuinely shocked. I kept repeating that it must be a mistake, that you couldn't possibly be behind it. Savannah looked out at the Manhattan skyline, her features still, her voice emotionless. He never saw me clearly. Not once. In all our years. There's no deal this time, Elias said. With the Azure Horizon evidence in hand, prosecutors are confident they'll secure a conviction, lengthy prison time. I see, she said. Her grip on the phone tightened slightly. Thank you for managing this, Elias. We'll discuss the press strategy tomorrow. After the call ended, she remained by the window, watching the city lights flicker to life. Langford Tower glowed in the distance, a symbol of the legacy she had preserved and redefined. The quiet swoosh of a door sliding open made her turn. Victoria entered the office, her expression solemn. It's done, isn't it? She asked without preamble. Preston's final fall. Savannah turned slowly to face her. You knew, Savannah said quietly. I suspected, Victoria corrected. You've been too accommodating these past months, too open to the idea of Preston's rehabilitation. That's not like you, to leave a threat like that unguarded. And you're not angry? Savannah asked cautiously. Victoria sighed, her shoulders heavy with maternal sorrow. My son made his choices, choices that dishonored Russell's legacy and harmed innocent people. Whatever happens now, he brought on himself. She moved to stand beside Savannah at the window, both of them silhouetted against the glittering skyline. Russell chose well, Victoria said softly. He trusted you. Not Preston, not even James. You. Because you understood that legacy isn't about names or bloodlines, it's about values. Savannah's voice dropped. I never wanted it to end this way. She allowed herself that rare flicker of vulnerability. There was a time I truly loved him. I believed in what we were building together. I know, Victoria replied, placing a hand gently on her arm. But you did what had to be done, to protect Langford Group and everything it stands for. After Victoria left, Savannah remained in her office, letting the silence settle around her. The Langford empire was safe, rebuilt, ethically realigned, financially stronger than ever. Its future was bright, and in her hands. Preston would never again threaten what she had salvaged from the ruins of his ambition. But success, she knew, came at a cost. She had waited, calculated, hidden her moves behind warm smiles and measured reconciliation. She had played the game to its bitter end and won, but there was a toll in becoming the leader Langford needed. She had learned to wield precision like a scalpel, channeling Preston's cunning without adopting his corruption. From her desk, Savannah drew out a photograph she never displayed, her wedding day with Preston. Two people, young and full of hope, before ambition, betrayal, and greed devoured what might have been. She let herself mourn that loss, for a heartbeat. Then she returned the photo to its drawer, where it belonged. The past was done, but the future remained, and it was wide open. Langford Group employed thousands, impacted millions, and stood now as a global symbol of principled enterprise. Little Richard would grow up not in the shadow of scandal, but in the light of renewal. Madeline had found not only her voice, but her purpose. Victoria had reclaimed relevance, steering the board with grace sharpened by loss. These were the victories that mattered. Not the satisfaction of Preston's fall, but the resilience of what rose from it. Savannah stepped onto the terrace, breathing in the crisp spring night. Tomorrow would bring press briefings, market noise, and the 1,000 moving pieces of corporate stewardship. But tonight was for reflection. She had walked a long road from being the polished, ever-smiling wife Preston had once sculpted to suit his image. She was no longer that woman. She never had been. The Langford legacy rested with her now, not because she married into it, but because she earned it, protected it, rebuilt it. Russell had seen that in her from the beginning. Preston had seen it too, just too late. As Manhattan glittered before her, Savannah lifted her glass in a quiet toast. "To you, Russell," she whispered, "the legacy stands." Langford's standard endured. Beyond the city lights, a new day approached, bringing challenges and opportunity alike. But Langford Group was ready, because Savannah Langford had turned a chess match into a transformation. Checkmate. Dear friend, sometimes the deepest strength lies not in striking back, but in standing firm, for values, for legacy, for what truly matters. Savannah Langford didn't win by outmaneuvering her opponent. She prevailed by honoring the quiet code of principled leadership, even when it cost her pieces of her heart. The Stoics remind us, if it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it. Savannah chose truth over pride, integrity over power, and in doing so, she didn't just protect a legacy, she became it. Her story is a testament that we're not defined by what breaks us, but by how we rise after. So here's to every silent warrior, every woman who's ever rebuilt something beautiful from betrayal. Your strength is not in how loud you roar, but in how quietly you endure and rebuild. If this story moved you, give it a like, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to join us for more stories that honor resilience, redemption, and the power of quiet courage.